Hey there, welcome to Bread Arrows. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. If these stories give you chills, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Get cozy and let the fear take over. The fluorescent lights of Portland General Hospital cast harsh shadows across Rebecca Holmes' face as she backed away from the patient bed. Clipboard clutched against her chest like armor. 28 years as head nurse had prepared Marjo Renner for almost everything: car accidents, burns, overdoses, the full spectrum of human suffering. But what lay before her now sent ice through her veins. "Sweet Jesus," Marjo whispered, her weathered hands trembling as she adjusted her wire-rimmed glasses. "I've never seen anything like this." Rebecca couldn't respond. The morphine drip beside her bed offered blessed relief from the agony that had driven her to the emergency room 4 hours earlier. Her hands, both of them, lay propped on sterile pillows, unrecognizable beneath layers of weeping blisters and blackened tissue. Angry red streaks snaked up her forearms like poisonous vines. Marjo composed herself, clearing her throat as she checked the IV line. "Dr. Stone will be here any minute, honey. She's our best infectious disease specialist. If anyone can figure this out, it's Victoria Stone." From the hallway came urgent voices, medical terms flying back and forth with increasing alarm. Words like necrotizing and unprecedented progression filtered through the half-closed door. "They're scared," Rebecca thought through her drug-induced haze. "The doctors are actually scared." 5 days ago, Rebecca had been whole. Grieving, yes. The 3rd anniversary of David's death still felt like yesterday, but physically intact. 5 days ago, the small cluster of blisters on her right palm had seemed like nothing more than an allergic reaction to the cleaning solutions she'd used on David's beloved marine aquarium. Now, she could barely recognize her own hands. The door swung open, admitting a tall woman with silver-streaked auburn hair. Dr. Victoria Stone carried herself with the authority of someone who had seen everything medicine could throw at her. Her green eyes, sharp behind tortoiseshell glasses, held both compassion and determination. "Rebecca Holmes," she said, her voice crisp as she lifted the chart. "I understand you've had quite the—" Her words died as her gaze fell on Rebecca's ravaged hands. For one telling moment, the doctor's professional mask slipped, revealing something that looked disturbingly like recognition. "My God," Dr. Stone breathed, quickly composing herself. "When did this start?" 5 days ago," Marjo answered, when Rebecca remained silent. "Started as blisters after cleaning a saltwater aquarium. She didn't seek treatment until the pain became unbearable." Stone's jaw tightened as she gently lifted Rebecca's wrist with gloved hands. "These red streaks indicate rapid lymphatic spread. The tissue death is advancing approximately 1 centimeter every 4 hours. Has anyone taken cultures?" "Labs processing them now," Marjo replied. "Initial microscopy shows what appears to be Vibrio vulnificus, but there's something else present, something they can't identify." Rebecca watched through half-lidded eyes as the doctor's expression grew increasingly troubled. "Get infectious disease control up here immediately. Full isolation protocols, and I want those culture results within the hour." Stone turned to Rebecca, her voice gentling. Mrs. Holmes, I need to ask about your medical history and about this aquarium. Can it wait? Marjo interjected. She's barely conscious. No, Stone said firmly. Based on what I'm seeing, we have approximately 48 hours before the tissue damage becomes irreversible. Without proper treatment, she could lose both hands. The words cut through Rebecca's morphine fog like ice water. Lose both hands. She tried to flex her fingers, but they responded with searing pain rather than movement. The aquarium, Rebecca managed, her voice a dry whisper. It was David's, my boyfriend. He died 3 years ago. Stone nodded, pulling up a chair. How long has the tank been without maintenance? Since he died, I couldn't bring myself to clean it. It was the last thing we worked on together. Something flickered across Stone's face, recognition again, or perhaps concern. Ms. Holmes, was your mother Dr. Anna Holmes from the Oregon Marine Research Institute? Rebecca's eyes widened. Yes, she died when I was 22. How did you? I treated your mother, Stone interrupted, turning to Marjo with newfound urgency. Get me Anna Holmes' complete medical records immediately. And call Dr. Peterson in microbiology. Tell him we need full genomic sequencing on whatever they find in those cultures. Marjo hurried from the room, leaving Rebecca alone with Stone and the steady beeping of monitors. Beyond the door, she could hear the hospital mobilizing isolation protocols being implemented, specialists being summoned. Dr. Stone, Rebecca whispered, fighting the morphine to form coherent thoughts. What's happening to me? The older woman's expression softened, her hand coming to rest on Rebecca's shoulder. Something I've seen only once before, Rebecca. In your mother. She paused, choosing her words carefully. But this time, we're going to fight it differently. This time, we have a chance to win. As Rebecca drifted back into medicated darkness, the last thing she saw was Stone's determined face, illuminated by the harsh hospital lights, speaking urgently into a phone. The last thought that crossed her mind was of David's aquarium, still sitting in her apartment, water still cloudy with the bacteria that was now consuming her flesh. The same bacteria that had somehow claimed her mother's life 9 years before. The clock was ticking. 3 weeks earlier, Rebecca stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her coastal apartment, watching storm clouds gather over the Columbia River. The gray November light cast David's marine aquarium in melancholy shadows, its corners thick with algae. The decorative coral formations and miniature shipwreck were barely visible beneath layers of neglect. 2 yellow-tailed damselfish, the sole survivors of what had once been a vibrant underwater ecosystem, drifted listlessly through the murky water. I should really clean that thing, she muttered to herself. The same thought she'd had every day for nearly 3 years. Cleaning it meant acknowledging it was just an aquarium now, not a living memorial. Not the last project she and David had worked on together before the drunk driver on Interstate 84 took him away forever. Rebecca traced a finger along the dusty glass, leaving a clean streak. Just beneath the surface, one of the damselfish followed her movement, its bright yellow scales catching what little light filtered through the murky water. David had named it Skipper, insisting every proper marine tank needed a captain to keep order among the other fish. "What do you think, Skipper?" she asked softly. "Time to get your house in order." The fish darted away, disappearing behind the coral formation. Rebecca sighed, turning back to the window. Below, fishing boats rocked in the harbor, as they had for generations in this Pacific Northwest port city. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, Jessica, no doubt checking to make sure she was still planning to attend the art exhibition tonight. 3 years of gentle but persistent efforts to pull Rebecca back into the world of the living. She picked up the phone, confirming with a quick text that yes, she would be there, and no, she didn't need a ride. Some days, the thought of returning to her research at the Marine Biology Institute seemed almost possible. Today wasn't one of those days. Rebecca's gaze drifted to the framed photograph on her bookshelf. David grinning beside the aquarium on the day they'd set it up, his arms around her waist, both of them laughing. They'd met in marine biology class at Portland State, bonding over their shared fascination with ocean ecosystems. While Rebecca had been drawn to the scientific aspects, David had approached the tank as an artist, creating miniature underwater landscapes with the eye of a filmmaker. "You've got the brains, Becca," he used to say. "I've got the vision. Together we're unstoppable." Unstoppable, until a drunk driver on a rainy night stopped everything. Rebecca moved to her desk, shuffling through unopened mail. Bills, credit card offers, and her hand paused over an official-looking envelope from Portland General Hospital. Probably another insurance question about her mother's old medical bills. Even 9 years after Dr. Anna Holmes' death, the paperwork occasionally resurfaced like unwelcome ghosts. She tossed the envelope aside, unopened. Her mother's illness had been another turning point, forcing Rebecca to abandon her graduate studies to care for her during those final terrible months. The doctors had never quite pinpointed what had caused the rapid deterioration. Some rare infection that had begun in her hands and spread throughout her system, resistant to every treatment they tried. "Tragedy comes in threes," her mother used to say matter-of-factly. First Rebecca's father leaving when she was 14, then her mother's illness 8 years later, and finally David's accident. Rebecca sometimes wondered if she'd exhausted her lifetime quota of misfortune, or if more waited around the corner. The storm broke outside, rain lashing against the windows. Rebecca glanced at her watch. 2 hours until the exhibition. If she was going to make an appearance, she should start getting ready. Jessica had been so excited about this show, featuring local artists' interpretations of marine life. In another life, David's work might have been among them. As she headed toward the shower, Rebecca paused once more by the aquarium, making a decision. This weekend, she would clean it properly. Not empty it, she wasn't ready for that step, but at least make it a proper home again for Skipper and his silent companion. A small step toward reclaiming some normalcy in her life. "You'd approve, wouldn't you?" she whispered to David's photograph. The smiling face gave no answer. Later that evening, dressed in a simple black dress she hadn't worn since the funeral, Rebecca navigated the crowded gallery space. Jessica spotted her immediately, breaking away from a conversation to envelope her in a tight hug. "You came," Jessica exclaimed, pulling back to examine her friend. "And you look like an actual human being tonight." "As opposed to what?" Rebecca asked with a half-smile. "As opposed to the hermit you've been impersonating for the past 3 years. Jessica handed her a glass of wine. "Come on, there's someone I want you to meet. He's doing incredible work with underwater photography, right up your alley." "Jess, I told you I'm not interested in." "It's professional, not personal," Jessica insisted, already guiding her through the crowd. His exhibition focuses on the impact of climate change on Pacific Northwest marine ecosystems. The kind of thing you used to care about. Remember. The slight sting in Jessica's words wasn't lost on Rebecca. Her friend had been endlessly patient, but that patience was beginning to wear thin. 3 years was a long time to put life on hold, even for grief as profound as Rebecca's. The gallery event passed in a blur of small talk and feigned interest. Rebecca found herself checking her watch, counting down the minutes until she could reasonably escape. Back in her apartment, she kicked off her heels and immediately went to the aquarium, watching the damselfish swim lazy circles in their cloudy domain. "Tomorrow," she promised, tapping the glass. "Tomorrow will get you cleaned up." That night, Rebecca dreamed of her mother. They were walking along the Oregon coast, collecting sea glass as they had when Rebecca was a child. Her mother's hands, always her most expressive feature, were covered in strange dark patches, but she didn't seem to notice or care. "The ocean remembers," her mother said in the dream, pressing a piece of blue sea glass into Rebecca's palm. "It holds onto things we try to forget." Rebecca woke with a start, morning sunlight streaming through her bedroom window. For a moment, the dream lingered, her mother's voice still echoing. She glanced at her own hands, half expecting to see dark patches blooming across her skin. The weekend arrived with clear skies and a fresh breeze off the Pacific. Rebecca gathered cleaning supplies beside the aquarium, determined to finally tackle the project. She found David's old maintenance log in the drawer. Beneath the tank stand detailed notes about water parameters, feeding schedules, and the specific needs of each species. His handwriting brought a familiar ache to her chest, but not as sharp as it once had been. Progress, she supposed. "All right, Skipper," she said, rolling up her sleeves. "Let's get your house in order." Rebecca worked methodically, referring occasionally to David's notes. She carefully transferred the 2 damselfish to a temporary container, then began dismantling the decorations, scrubbing away months of accumulated algae. The water, when she began siphoning it out, was cloudier than she'd realized, with an unpleasant smell that made her wrinkle her nose. "How have you guys survived in this?" she murmured to the fish in their temporary home. "Tough little sailors, aren't you?" As she reached into the tank to remove pieces of coral, a sharp pain stung her right palm. Rebecca pulled her hand back, examining the small cut where a broken fragment of artificial coral had sliced her skin. A thin line of blood welled up, mixing with the tank water that coated her fingers. "Damn it," she muttered, rinsing her hand under the tap. The cut was minor, barely worth a bandage. She dried her hand on a towel and continued working, never giving the small wound another thought. She couldn't have known that in that moment, as tank water mingled with her blood, a microscopic invader had found its way into her system. An invader that had been waiting patiently in the neglected aquarium for nearly 3 years, growing stronger in the stagnant conditions, evolving into something the medical textbooks had yet to classify. The first invisible spore of what would eventually bring Rebecca Holmes to the brink of disaster had found its host. Rebecca awoke to the sound of movement in her hospital room. The fog of medication had lifted somewhat, leaving behind a throbbing pain that radiated from her hands up to her elbows. She blinked against the morning light filtering through the blinds, struggling to orient herself. "Well, look who's rejoined the land of the living," came Marjo Renner's steady voice. The head nurse was adjusting monitors beside Rebecca's bed, her experienced hands moving with practiced efficiency. "How's the pain, honey?" Scale of 1 to 10. Rebecca swallowed, her throat dry as sandpaper. 8, she managed, maybe 9. "That tracks with what your vitals are telling me." Marjo reached for a paper cup of water, holding the straw to Rebecca's lips. "Small sips now. Dr. Stone adjusted your pain medication, but we're trying to keep you alert enough for the consultation this morning." As the cool water soothed her throat, Rebecca's gaze drifted to her hands, still propped on pillows. The sight sent a fresh wave of panic through her. The blisters had multiplied overnight, some having burst to reveal raw flesh beneath. The blackened areas had expanded, and the red streaks now extended past her wrists, disappearing beneath the hospital gown at her elbows. "They're worse," she whispered. Marjo's expression remained professionally neutral, but her eyes betrayed concern. "The infection is aggressive, no point sugarcoating it. But we're aggressive too, honey. Got the best minds in the hospital working on your case." "Am I going to lose them?" Rebecca asked, voicing the fear that had haunted her morphine dreams. "My hands." Marjo paused in her duties, meeting Rebecca's gaze directly. "Dr. Stone is doing everything possible to prevent that outcome. But I won't lie to you, it's a possibility we need to prepare for." Rebecca closed her eyes, fighting back tears. Without her hands, what would she be? Who would she be? She thought of all the things she took for granted, preparing meals, typing on her laptop, turning pages in a book, someday returning to her laboratory work. All potentially gone, because she'd neglected an aquarium cleaning for 3 years. "This is my punishment," she thought bitterly, "for holding onto the past, for not letting go when I should have." "Now I can practically hear those wheels turning in your head," Marjo said, interrupting Rebecca's spiral of self-recrimination. "And I'd bet my pension they're not spinning in a helpful direction." Rebecca opened her eyes to find the older woman studying her with surprising gentleness. "Worrying is like a rocking chair," Marjo continued, checking Rebecca's IV line. "Gives you something to do but doesn't get you anywhere. My grandmother used to say that, and she lived to be 99. Hard not to worry when they're talking about amputation," Rebecca replied, her voice breaking. "Nobody's made any decisions yet," Marjo corrected firmly. "And fretting yourself sick won't help those antibiotics do their job. Besides, you're not the first young person I've seen bounce back from something the doctors thought was impossible." Rebecca tried to take comfort in the nurse's words, but her mind kept returning to the image of herself without hands. How would she feed herself, dress herself? Would she become dependent on others for the most basic tasks? The thought was almost unbearable. "Has anyone called my father?" she asked suddenly. Marjo consulted the chart. "We have him listed as your emergency contact, but there's a note saying multiple attempts to reach him were unsuccessful. Is there someone else we should try?" Rebecca shook her head slightly. Her father had remarried and moved to Phoenix years ago, their relationship reduced to obligatory holiday phone calls and occasional birthday cards. After her mother died, what little connection they'd maintained had withered further. She doubted he'd come even if they reached him. "Just my friend Jessica Miller," Rebecca said. "She's listed as my secondary contact." "Miss Miller has been called," Marjo confirmed. "Left word that she's driving down from Seattle and should be here by noon. At least Jess would come." Reliable, pushy, well-meaning Jess, who never let Rebecca retreat too far into herself, who kept inviting her to events even when Rebecca declined 9 times out of 10, who checked in weekly without fail for 3 solid years. The door opened, admitting Dr. Stone and 2 other physicians Rebecca didn't recognize. From their serious expressions, this wasn't a social call. "Ms. Holmes," Stone began, approaching the bedside. "How are you feeling this morning?" "Like my hands are being eaten alive," Rebecca replied bluntly. "Which I guess they are." Stone nodded, appreciating the directness. "I'd like to introduce Dr. Martinez, our hand surgery specialist, and Dr. Williams from infectious disease. We've been reviewing your case and the preliminary lab results." Rebecca's stomach tightened, and the cultures have confirmed Vibrio vulnificus as the primary pathogen. "But it's an unusually virulent strain," Stone explained. "There's also evidence of a secondary infection with what appears to be a previously unknown marine bacteria. The combination is exceedingly rare, especially with this level of tissue invasion. Both typically from contaminated water sources," Dr. Williams added. "The combination suggests prolonged exposure to a highly concentrated bacterial environment." Rebecca nodded mechanically, trying to process the information. "What's the treatment plan?" The 3 doctors exchanged glances, a silent communication that sent another wave of dread through Rebecca. "We've started you on a combination of powerful antibiotics," Stone said carefully. "However, the infection is progressing despite this intervention. The next 24 to 48 hours will be critical in determining whether the medications can halt the advance." Martinez stepped forward. "Miss Holmes, I need to be direct with you. If the infection continues to progress at its current rate, we may need to consider surgical intervention to prevent further spread." "Surgical intervention," Rebecca repeated flatly. "You mean amputation?" "That would be a last resort," Martinez assured her. "We would begin with debridement of the affected tissue, removing only what is necessary. But you need to understand that if the infection reaches deeper structures, tendons, blood vessels, bone, more extensive measures may become unavoidable." Rebecca stared at the ceiling, fighting the urge to scream. 3 years of grief and isolation, slowly working her way back toward normal life, and now this. It was almost laughable in its cruelty. "Ms. Holmes," Stone said gently, "I understand this is overwhelming, but there's something else we need to discuss." She nodded to the other doctors, who quietly exited the room, leaving only Stone, Marjo, and Rebecca. "What haven't you told me?" Rebecca asked, suddenly alert. Stone pulled up a chair, sitting at eye level with Rebecca. "I mentioned yesterday that I treated your mother. What I didn't say is that she presented with a remarkably similar infection pattern." Rebecca's breath caught. "What?" "9 years ago, your mother was admitted with a progressive infection that began in her hands and proved resistant to standard treatments." Stone continued. "The presentation was different enough that I didn't make the connection immediately. But after reviewing her records last night, the similarities are striking." "Are you saying this is the same thing that killed my mother?" Rebecca whispered. "I'm saying there may be a connection we don't yet understand," Stone replied carefully. "Your mother's case progressed differently, more systemically, affecting her internal organs. We're hopeful that by catching your infection earlier, we can prevent that progression." Rebecca's mind raced, fragments of memory surfacing. Her mother's hands, always hidden in gloves toward the end. the doctor's confused expressions, the hushed conversations that stopped when Rebecca entered the room. "How did she get it?" Rebecca asked. "My mother." "That was never definitively established," Stone admitted. There was some speculation about contaminated water exposure during her work with the Marine Research Institute. She had been collecting samples from coastal areas, the same coastal areas where David had collected specimens for their aquarium. The connection was too specific to be coincidence. "Dr. Stone," Rebecca said slowly, "the fish in David's tank, they came from local waters. Specimens he collected for our research. Could that be the link?" A flicker of understanding crossed the doctor's face. "It's certainly possible. Some pathogens can remain dormant in closed systems for years, especially if conditions favor their growth." Marjo, who had been quietly monitoring Rebecca's vitals, spoke up. "Doc, her fever's rising again. 101.6 and climbing." Stone stood quickly. "We need to adjust the antibiotic protocol immediately and get that tank tested. Whatever's in there might give us the key to fighting this." As they rushed to respond to her worsening condition, Rebecca closed her eyes, memories of her mother's final days mingling with the pain radiating through her arms. The past she couldn't let go of had reached forward through time to claim her through something as innocent as a neglected aquarium. "I'm sorry, David," she whispered to herself. "I should have let you go." The Saturday morning Rebecca decided to clean David's aquarium had dawned bright and clear, a rare, perfect autumn day in Portland. She'd risen early, motivated by a newfound determination that had been missing for months. The gallery opening the night before, while uncomfortable at times, had reminded her that life continued outside the walls of her grief. She stood in her kitchen, sipping coffee and making a mental list of supplies she'd need. David had been meticulous about tank maintenance, keeping a special bucket, siphon hoses, algae scrapers, and water testing kits in the storage closet. Rebecca hadn't touched any of it since his death. "Today's the day, Skipper," she called to the aquarium across the room. "No more neglect. Your home is getting a complete overhaul." Retrieving the supplies felt like opening a time capsule. Each item was exactly where David had left it, his organizational system still intact. Rebecca found herself running her fingers along the equipment, remembering how he demonstrated proper technique for gravel cleaning or filter maintenance, his hands confident and sure. "The trick is to vacuum the substrate without disturbing the biological balance," he'd explained once, his voice taking on the passionate tone reserved for things he truly cared about. "It's an art form, Becca, not just cleaning." She smiled at the memory, feeling a lightness she hadn't experienced in months. Perhaps this was what moving forward looked like, not forgetting David, but reclaiming the parts of life they'd shared without being paralyzed by loss. Rebecca set up her workstation methodically, laying out towels to catch spills and preparing a temporary container for the fish. She consulted David's maintenance log, noting the specific gravity and pH levels he'd maintained for the saltwater environment. The tank had once housed a diverse collection of anemones, coral, and colorful tropical fish. Now only the 2 hardy damselfish remained, survivors of her prolonged neglect. She rolled up her sleeves and began by carefully netting the fish, transferring them to the prepared container. "Sorry about the downgrade in accommodations, guys," she told them as they darted nervously in their temporary home. It's just for a few hours. Next came the dismantling of decorations. The miniature shipwrecked David had found at a nautical antique store various pieces of artificial coral and rocks collected from their favorite beach. Each piece was coated in a thick layer of algae, the once vibrant colors muted beneath the green film. The water was cloudier than she'd realized, with a slightly foul odor that made her wrinkle her nose. How had she let it get so bad? The filter had stopped working months ago, and she'd never bothered to replace it, assuming the remaining fish would eventually die off like the others. Instead, they'd adapted to the deteriorating conditions, becoming as resilient as Rebecca herself had been forced to become. "You guys are survivors," she murmured, watching them swim in their temporary container. "I'll give you that." She began siphoning the old water, directing it into a bucket for disposal. The smell grew stronger as she disturbed the settled debris at the bottom of the tank. Rebecca considered finding a mask to wear, but decided to power through. This was her penance for the neglect breathing in the consequences of her inaction. With most of the water removed, she could now reach inside to remove the gravel and remaining decorations. A piece of artificial coral had partially broken, its sharp edges hidden beneath the murky water. As Rebecca reached in to lift out a handful of gravel, she felt a sudden sharp pain across her palm. "Ouch, damn it," she hissed, withdrawing her hand to find a thin line of blood welling up from a cut across her right palm. It wasn't deep, but it stung fiercely, especially when the tank water made contact with the open wound. Rebecca rinsed her hand under the kitchen faucet, watching the blood thin and disappear down the drain. She should probably clean the cut properly, maybe apply some antibiotic ointment, but the first aid kit was in the bathroom, and she was determined to finish what she'd started. The cut wasn't serious, barely more than a paper cut. She dried her hand on a paper towel and continued working, ignoring the occasional sting when tank water splashed into the small wound. By midday, she had completely dismantled the tank, scrubbed every component, and was beginning the process of reassembly. Her phone rang as she was rinsing the gravel. Jessica's name flashed on the screen. "Look at you, calling before noon on a Saturday," Rebecca answered, cradling the phone against her shoulder as she continued working. "I thought you'd be sleeping off last night's wine," Jessica replied. "Please, that was hardly enough to give me a hangover," Rebecca said, feeling a twinge of guilt. "I'm calling to check on you. You disappeared so quickly last night." "Sorry about that," Rebecca said. "I hit my social limit, but I'm glad I went. Really." Jessica sounded genuinely surprised. "Because you looked like someone being slowly tortured the entire time." Rebecca laughed, the sound unfamiliar to her own ears. "Only mildly tortured, but it was good to get out. Actually, I'm cleaning David's aquarium right now." A brief silence followed. When Jessica spoke again, her voice was carefully neutral. "That's a big step, Becca." "It's just a cleaning, not an exorcism," Rebecca replied, defensive despite herself. "The poor fish have been living in squalor. I should have done this months ago." "I didn't mean it like that," Jessica backpedaled. "I think it's great, it's progress." Progress? The word hung between them, loaded with all the expectations Jessica had been too kind to voice over the past 3 years. The expectation that Rebecca would eventually move on, whatever that meant. That she would date again, finish her degree, return to the research she'd abandoned. That she would stop living, as if she too had died on that rainy night with David. Yeah, well, baby steps, Rebecca said finally. Oh, when I cut myself on a broken decoration, do you think I need a tetanus shot? When was your last one? Jessica asked. Rebecca thought back. I don't remember. College, maybe. If it's been more than 5 years, you should probably get one, Jessica advised. Was it rusty? It was artificial coral, so no rust. But it's been sitting in some pretty disgusting water. Clean it well with soap and water, put on some antibiotic cream, and keep an eye on it, Jessica suggested. If it starts looking red or inflamed, then worry. How deep is it? Rebecca examined her palm, where the cut had already stopped bleeding. Not deep at all, more like a scratch. You'll live, Jessica declared. Hey, want to get lunch tomorrow? I can drive down to your place. The invitation was tempting. 2 social engagements in one weekend would be a record for Rebecca's recent life. Sure, she found herself saying, that would be nice. After hanging up, Rebecca returned to her task with renewed energy. By late afternoon, the tank was completely reassembled, filled with fresh water treated with proper additives for a saltwater environment. The decorations, minus the broken coral, were arranged artfully the way David would have done. The filter hummed quietly, circulating crystal-clear water. Welcome home, guys, she said, carefully returning Skipper and his companion to their improved habitat. The fish darted around excitedly, exploring their clean surroundings as if seeing them for the first time. Rebecca stood back, admiring her work with a sense of accomplishment she hadn't felt in ages. The tank looked almost as good as it had when David was alive. Almost, but not quite. His artistic touch was missing. That indefinable quality he brought to everything he created. Her hand throbbed slightly, and she realized she'd forgotten to clean the cut properly. In the bathroom, she washed it thoroughly with soap and water, noticing that the edges looked slightly puffy. She applied a generous amount of antibiotic ointment and covered it with a bandage, making a mental note to check it again before bed. That evening, Rebecca ordered takeout from her favorite Thai restaurant, another small luxury she denied herself recently, and sat by the window watching the fish explore their rejuvenated home while the sun set over the Columbia River. For the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of forward momentum. The cut on her palm itched beneath the bandage, but she resisted the urge to scratch it. By morning, the area around the wound had developed a cluster of tiny blisters, which Rebecca dismissed as an allergic reaction to the adhesive in the bandage. She applied more antibiotic ointment, covered it with a different type of bandage, and thought nothing more of it as she prepared for Jessica's visit. She couldn't have known that by Tuesday, those innocent-looking blisters would multiply and spread. That by Wednesday, the first signs of tissue death would appear. That by Thursday morning, the pain would become unbearable, sending her to the emergency room where Marjo Renner would back away from her bed in horror, whispering, "Sweet Jesus, I've never seen anything like this." She couldn't have known that with every passing hour, the clock ticking down to save her hands, and possibly her life, was already running. "We're losing ground," Dr. Stone stated grimly, examining the progression charts spread across the conference room table. The clock on the wall read 2:17 a.m., marking 20 hours since Rebecca Holmes had been admitted. Outside the windows, the Pacific Northwest night was pitch black, a steady rain tapping against the glass like impatient fingers. Around the table sat the hastily assembled response team. Martinez, the hand surgeon, Dr. Williams from infectious disease, Dr. Patel, the hospital's chief microbiologist, and Marjo Renner, who had refused to go off duty despite having worked a double shift. The antibiotic cocktail isn't penetrating the biofilm the bacteria have formed, Dr. Patel explained, pointing to microscope images. It's unlike anything I've seen before. The organisms appear to be communicating, coordinating their defense mechanisms. In English, please, Marjo interjected. For those of us who haven't spent 20 years staring through microscopes. Dr. Patel nodded apologetically. Basically, the bacteria have created a protective shield that our antibiotics can't penetrate effectively, and they're spreading faster than we can kill them. Stone massaged her temples, fatigue evident in every line of her face. What about hyperbaric oxygen therapy? Could that help? It might, Williams responded, but our chamber is under maintenance. The nearest functional unit is in Seattle. Then we get her to Seattle, Stone decided immediately. In this weather, Marjo gestured toward the window, where lightning briefly illuminated the torrential downpour. The roads are flooding, and air transport is grounded until morning at the earliest. The room fell silent, the gravity of the situation settling over them like a physical weight. Every hour that passed without effective intervention pushed Rebecca closer to amputation, or worse. What about Anna Holmes' case? Martinez asked suddenly. You mentioned similarities, Victoria. Did anything work for her? Stone's expression darkened. No. By the time we understood what we were dealing with, the infection had spread systemically. Nothing we tried made a significant difference. But we caught this earlier, Marjo pointed out. And medical science has advanced in 9 years. True, Stone acknowledged, but without knowing the exact strain we're dealing with, we're still shooting in the dark. She turned to Patel. How much longer until the full genomic sequencing is complete? At least 6 more hours, he replied. The lab is prioritizing it, but it's a complex analysis. Stone stood abruptly. We don't have 6 hours. I want that tank analyzed immediately. Whatever's in there might give us the key to fighting this. In Rebecca's apartment, Jessica Miller stood frozen in the doorway, staring at the marine aquarium that glowed eerily in the darkened living room. The hospital's urgent call had sent her racing to Rebecca's place to collect water samples for analysis. Armed with sterile containers and strict instructions not to touch the water directly. Of all the things, Jessica whispered to herself, eyeing the tank warily. This innocuous aquarium, the last physical connection between Rebecca and David, had somehow harbored something deadly enough to land her friend in isolation. She approached cautiously, as if the tank might suddenly shatter and spray its contents across the room. The 2 damselfish swam peacefully, oblivious to the havoc their home had wreaked. How are you 2 not affected? She murmured, carefully unscrewing the lid of the collection container. Following the instructions she'd been given, Jessica used the sterile pipette to draw water from different areas of the tank. As she worked, her gaze fell on the framed photograph of Rebecca and David beside the tank. They looked so happy, so full of possibility. Jessica remembered the day it was taken. She'd been the photographer, capturing the moment they'd finished setting up their research project that was clearly more about their shared passion than any academic requirement. Oh, Becca, she sighed, securing the samples. Why couldn't you just let go? In the hospital laboratory, Dr. Patel hunched over a microscope, his eyes burning from hours of concentrated study. The samples from Rebecca's infected tissue revealed a microbial world in chaos bacteria, multiplying at an alarming rate, consuming healthy cells and spreading outward in an organized pattern that seemed almost deliberate. "Come on, give up your secrets," he muttered, adjusting the focus. Somewhere in this microscopic battlefield was the key to stopping the invasion, if only he could identify it before time ran out. His phone buzzed with a text from Stone. "Any progress?" He typed back a quick negative response, knowing it wasn't what she wanted to hear. The clock on the wall showed 3:42 a.m. The critical window was narrowing by the minute. "I'm sorry, David. I should have let you go." Marjo looked up from her charting to find Rebecca awake, her eyes glassy with fever as she stared at the ceiling. The infection had progressed despite their best efforts. The red streaks were now visible at her shoulders. Her temperature had spiked to 103.4, and the pain medication was barely keeping her comfortable. "Who are you talking to, honey?" Marjo asked gently, approaching the bed. Rebecca's gaze drifted to Marjo, though it was unclear if she truly saw her. "David, my boyfriend, he died." "I know, sweetheart. The doctors mentioned that the aquarium was his." Rebecca continued, her voice distant. "I couldn't empty it, couldn't say goodbye." A tear slipped down her flushed cheek. "Now look what happened." Marjo checked Rebecca's IV line, adjusting the flow rate slightly. "You couldn't have known this would happen. Nobody could." "My mother knew," Rebecca whispered. "She warned me in my dream. The ocean remembers," she said. "It holds onto things we try to forget." Marjo felt a chill despite the warmth of the room. Fever-induced delirium, most likely, but unsettling nonetheless. "Try to rest, honey. Save your strength." "Am I going to die?" Rebecca asked suddenly, her voice clearer. "Like my mother did." The question caught Marjo off guard. In 30 years of nursing, she developed a sixth sense about which patients were truly in danger. Rebecca's infection was severe, potentially life-altering, but Marjo didn't sense that death was imminent. Still, she'd learned long ago not to make promises she couldn't keep. "Not if Victoria Stone has anything to say about it," Marjo replied firmly. "That woman is the most stubborn doctor I've ever worked with. She doesn't like to lose." Rebecca seemed to accept this, her eyes drifting closed again. "I'm tired of holding on," she murmured. "So tired." Marjo watched as Rebecca slipped back into restless sleep, her bandaged hands twitching occasionally, as if trying to grasp something just out of reach. "9 years ago, I failed Anna Holmes," Dr. Stone said, staring out the window of her office as dawn broke over the harbor. "I was younger then, less experienced. We tried everything available at the time, but the infection moved too quickly." William sat across from her, reviewing Anna's old medical records. "You can't blame yourself, Victoria. From what I'm seeing here, her case presented differently, more systemic involvement from the start." "But the source appears to be the same," Stone insisted. "Local waters, marine bacteria that somehow mutated into something more aggressive." She turned from the window. Anna worked for the Marine Research Institute. She was collecting water samples from the same areas where Rebecca's boyfriend gathered specimens for their aquarium. "Could be coincidence," William suggested. "I don't believe in coincidences," Stone replied. "Not when the clinical presentation is this similar. There's a connection we're missing. Her phone rang. Dr. Patel from the lab. Stone answered immediately, putting it on speaker. "I've got something," Patel said without preamble. "The tank water sample just arrived. There's a match with the bacteria in Rebecca's tissue, but with a crucial difference. The tank strain has a mutation that makes it resistant to standard antibiotics." "We already knew that," Stone said impatiently. "Yes, but here's the interesting part," Patel continued. "This mutation is almost identical to one documented in a research paper from 9 years ago. A study of antibiotic-resistant bacteria found in coastal water samples from Oregon." Stone's eyes widened. "Who authored the paper?" "A team from the Marine Research Institute," Patel replied. "Lead author was Dr. Anna Holmes." "Anna Holmes," Stone breathed. "Rebecca's mother." "There's more," Patel added. "The mutation appears to be triggered by prolonged exposure to stagnant conditions, especially in the presence of certain trace elements commonly found in aquarium environments." Stone exchanged a significant look with Williams. "So the bacteria in the tank essentially evolved over time, becoming more virulent the longer it remained undisturbed." "Exactly," Patel confirmed. "And based on what we're seeing, the strain has developed a novel method of tissue invasion that allows it to spread much more rapidly than typical marine bacteria." "Can you identify any weaknesses?" Stone pressed. "Anything we can exploit?" "Possibly," Patel said, excitement creeping into his voice. "The mutation that grants antibiotic resistance also appears to create a vulnerability to certain metallic compounds, specifically silver-based antimicrobials. I'm running tests now to confirm." Stone felt the first stirring of hope since Rebecca had been admitted. "Send me everything you have, and track down a copy of Anna Holmes' original research. If she identified this strain 9 years ago, her work might hold the key to fighting it now." As she hung up, Stone turned to Williams. "Get me the strongest silver-based antimicrobial compounds we have access to, and call Seattle. I want that hyperbaric chamber ready the moment the weather clears." The race against time had taken a new direction, but the clock continued its relentless countdown. Outside, the storm was beginning to break, thin rays of sunlight piercing through the clouds like fragile strands of hope. Jessica Miller burst through the hospital entrance, rainwater streaming from her jacket, despite the umbrella she'd abandoned in the parking lot. The storm had intensified during her drive back from the Marine Research Institute, turning the coastal highway into a treacherous ribbon of standing water and limited visibility. But the precious cargo she carried, Anna Holmes' original research files, retrieved from the Institute's archives, had made the journey essential. "I need to see Dr. Victoria Stone immediately," she told the front desk attendant, holding up the waterproof document case. "It's about Rebecca Holmes. These are the files she's waiting for." Minutes later, Jessica found herself ushered into a conference room where Stone, Williams, and several other medical staff were huddled around laptop screens and stacks of medical journals. The atmosphere was tense, faces drawn with fatigue and worry. "You found them," Stone said, her professional composure briefly giving way to naked relief. "Anna's original research notes." "It wasn't easy," Jessica replied, opening the case to reveal several file folders and a weathered field notebook. The Institute had archived most of her work, but her supervisor remembered her and helped me locate these. Some of it was still in a box marked for disposal. She hesitated, then added, "How's Rebecca?" Stone's expression darkened. "Critical, but stable. The infection continues to advance despite our best efforts. These files might be our last best hope for understanding what we're dealing with." Patel reached for the notebook, opening it carefully. Anna Holmes' handwriting filled the pages, meticulous notes, hand-drawn diagrams, and data tables documenting her work, sampling coastal waters along the Oregon shoreline. May 14, 2015, he read aloud. Unusual bacterial presence detected in samples from Tillamook Bay North. Preliminary analysis suggests Vibrio species with anomalous growth pattern and unexpected antibiotic resistance. Further investigation warranted. Stone leaned over his shoulder. "That's less than a mile from where Rebecca lives now, and where her mother worked." Patel continued scanning the notebook, flipping pages rapidly, until stopping at an entry from 3 months later. "This is it," he said, excitement rising in his voice. August 3rd, 2015. Confirmed novel strain of Vibrio vulnificus in Tillamook Bay samples. Resistance to standard antibiotics, likely due to prolonged exposure to agricultural runoff containing trace antibiotics. Of particular concern is the strain's enhanced virulence when exposed to metallic compounds commonly found in marine equipment. Metallic compounds, Stone frowned. But our tests suggested silver-based compounds might be effective against the strain in Rebecca's tissue. Wait, Patel continued reading. September 17, 2015. Further laboratory analysis reveals complex relationship with metallic elements. Initial exposure enhances virulence, but sustained high-concentration exposure proves bactericidal. Potential treatment implications if infection occurs. Stone turned to one of the other doctors. "Get me Rebecca's chart, now." As the doctor hurried from the room, she returned her attention to the notebook. Anna knew. She identified the risk and was researching potential treatments. But if she knew, Jessica asked, why did she herself become infected? A heavy silence fell over the room. Stone's expression was grim as she replied, "Because knowing a risk exists doesn't make you immune to it." Anna was collecting samples, studying this bacteria. One moment of carelessness, one small cut or abrasion while handling contaminated water, just like Rebecca. Jessica whispered. The doctor returned with Rebecca's chart, and Stone scanned it quickly. The timeline fits. Anna Holmes first presented with symptoms in late 2015, approximately 2 months after these last research notes. By then, the infection had already spread systemically. But why wasn't her research connected to her illness? Jessica asked. Medical privacy, Williams explained. Her doctors, including Victoria, knew she worked for the Marine Research Institute, but the details of her specific research weren't part of her medical record, and she was already too sick to communicate clearly by the time Victoria became involved in her case. Patel had continued reading through Anna's notes. "There's more," he said urgently. She documented a potential genetic factor. Some test subjects, laboratory mice, showed increased susceptibility to the bacteria based on a specific genetic marker. She was planning to investigate human genetic factors next. The implications hung in the air like a thunderclap. Stone voiced what everyone was thinking. A genetic predisposition that Anna passed to Rebecca. That's why the infection progressed so rapidly in both of them. Is that even possible? Jessica asked. Absolutely, Patel confirmed. Certain genetic variants can significantly impact immune response to specific pathogens. If Anna and Rebecca share such a variant, then Rebecca was essentially primed for this infection from birth. Stone finished the thought, and when she cut herself while cleaning that tank, she trailed off, the horrifying progression clear to everyone. Jessica sank into a chair, the weight of the revelation settling over her. The aquarium, David's aquarium. All this time, it was a perfect incubator. Stagnant water, traces of metals from the decorative items, minimal filtration, Patel said grimly. Ideal conditions for this particular strain to thrive and mutate further. Does Anna's research say anything about effective treatments? Stone asked urgently. Patel flipped to the final pages of the notebook. She was exploring high-concentration silver compounds as a potential treatment, but these appear to be preliminary findings only. She notes that sustained exposure at precise concentrations showed promising results in laboratory conditions. But there's no indication she developed a complete treatment protocol. Stone straightened, a new determination in her bearing. It's a start. We need to synthesize a silver-based treatment immediately and prepare for aggressive debridement of the affected tissue. She turned to another doctor. Check if the road to Seattle is passable yet. We need that hyperbaric chamber. As the medical team sprang into action, Jessica remained seated, her mind reeling from the connections that had led to this moment. It's almost like fate, she said quietly. David collects specimens from the same waters Anna studied. The tank sits neglected after his death, allowing the bacteria to evolve. Rebecca finally cleans it and becomes infected with the same thing that killed her mother. Science, not fate, Stone corrected, though her tone had softened. But yes, the coincidences are remarkable. Will she survive? Jessica asked bluntly. Stone met her gaze directly. Anna's infection was already systemic when treatment began. Rebecca's is still primarily localized to her hands and arms. That gives us an advantage her mother didn't have. She paused. But I won't lie to you, the next 24 hours are critical. And even if we save her life, she may still lose her hands. The brutal honesty hit Jessica like a physical blow. She thought of Rebecca, brilliant, passionate Rebecca, whose hands had always been in motion, taking notes, examining specimens, gesturing animatedly when discussing her research, who had already lost so much and now stood to lose even more. There's something else you should know, Jessica said suddenly. Something that might be important. Stone raised an eyebrow. Go on. David's death anniversary was last week, Jessica explained. 3 years since the accident. Rebecca's been struggling more than usual lately. That's why I pushed her to come to the gallery opening to get her out of the apartment. She swallowed hard. And that's probably why she finally decided to clean the tank. It was like she was finally ready to move forward, only to be pulled back by this connection to her past. Stone murmured, life rarely concerns itself with fairness. But Rebecca has something her mother didn't. We know what we're fighting now. As if on cue, Patel's phone rang. His expression grew alarmed as he listened to the caller. We need to move quickly, he announced after hanging up. Rebecca's fever has spiked to 104.2, and there are signs the infection is beginning to spread systemically. Stone's face hardened with resolve. Begin synthesizing the silver-based treatment immediately. I want it ready within the hour. and prepare for emergency debridement. She turned to Jessica. Anna Holmes couldn't save herself, but she may have just saved her daughter. These research notes could make all the difference. As the doctors hurried from the room, Jessica remained behind, her gaze falling on Anna's weathered notebook. Inside were the careful observations of a scientist who had unwittingly documented the very thing that would eventually kill her, and that now threatened her daughter's life. The connection across time and loss was both beautiful and terrible, a strand of fate disguised as scientific coincidence. "Hold on, Becca," Jessica whispered. "Your mother left you the map. Now we just need to follow it home." Rebecca floated in a fever dream, untethered from time and place. In her delirium, she stood on the rocky shore of Tillamook Bay, watching as dark water lapped against the stones. The sky above was neither day nor night, but a strange twilight that cast everything in shades of blue and gray. Beside her stood her mother, Anna Holmes, looking exactly as she had before her illness, tall and strong, her weathered hands moving expressively as she spoke. "I tried to warn you, Rebecca," her mother said, her voice carried on the salt wind. "The ocean remembers. It holds onto things we try to forget." "I didn't understand," Rebecca replied, watching as the tide crept higher, water swirling around their ankles. "How could I have known?" Her mother's face softened with compassion. "We never truly know the dangers that surround us. We can only observe, record, and hope our findings help others." She lifted her hands, which now bore the same blackened tissue and angry red streaks that marked Rebecca's own. "Some lessons are written in flesh." The dream shifted. Rebecca was in her apartment, standing before David's aquarium. Inside, the water had turned black as ink, yet somehow transparent enough that she could see the damselfish swimming in desperate circles, their bright scales glowing eerily against the darkness. Behind the tank stood David, his face obscured by shadow. "I kept it for you," Rebecca told him, her voice echoing strangely. "I couldn't let go." "But you have to let go now," David replied, his voice distorted as if coming from underwater. "It's killing you, Becca, just like it killed your mother." Rebecca looked down at her hands, watching in horror as the blackened tissue spread before her eyes, crawling up her arms like living darkness, consuming flesh as it advanced. She tried to scream, but no sound emerged. "Rebecca, Rebecca." The insistent voice pulled her from the nightmare. Rebecca opened her eyes to find Marjo Renner leaning over her, the nurse's familiar face creased with concern. "There you are," Marjo said, relief evident in her tone. "You've been having quite the fever dream, honey. Been calling out for your mother and someone named David." Rebecca tried to speak, but her throat felt raw and parched. Marjo held a straw to her lips, allowing her to take small sips of ice water. "How long?" Rebecca managed. "You've been in and out for about 8 hours, Marjo replied, checking the monitors beside the bed. "Your fever spiked something fierce, had us almighty worried." Rebecca struggled to orient herself, the nightmare images still vivid in her mind. She tried to look at her hands, but found them obscured by new bandages that extended past her elbows. A cold fear slithered down her spine. "My hands," she whispered, "did they?" "They're still attached, if that's what you're asking," Marjo assured her. "But I won't sugarcoat it. There's been significant progression. Dr. Stone performed an emergency debridement while you were out." "Debridement," Rebecca's voice was barely audible. "Surgical removal of infected tissue," Marjo explained gently. She had to be quite aggressive to stay ahead of the spread. Rebecca closed her eyes, trying to process this information through the fog of medication and fever. She couldn't feel her hands at all now. Whether from nerve damage or pain medication, she couldn't tell. The uncertainty was almost worse than pain would have been. Jessica found your mother's research, Marjo continued, adjusting the IV drip. Dr. Stone thinks it might be the key to fighting this infection. They're trying a new treatment based on her work. Rebecca's eyes flew open. My mother's research. Marjo nodded. Apparently, she was studying the very bacteria that infected you. Documented everything in detail. Like mother, like daughter, I suppose both scientists to the core. A memory surfaced through Rebecca's delirium. Her mother at the kitchen table, methodically noting observations in her field notebook, pausing occasionally to flex her fingers as if they pained her. Rebecca had been home from college that weekend, focused on her own studies, barely paying attention to her mother's work. I should have asked her more about her research, Rebecca murmured. Should have paid attention. Now don't you start that, Marjo admonished gently. No use dwelling on should-haves. Your mother left behind the information we needed, and that's what matters now. The door opened, admitting Stone and a younger Dr. Rebecca didn't recognize. Their expressions were grave as they approached the bed. Rebecca, Stone began, her tone measured. How much do you remember about the last few hours? Almost nothing, Rebecca admitted. Marjo mentioned a debridement. Stone nodded. Yes, the infection was advancing rapidly despite our initial treatments. We had to remove significant amounts of affected tissue to prevent further spread. She paused, choosing her words carefully. We're now implementing a treatment protocol based partly on your mother's research. A silver-based compound that appears to be effective against this particular strain. Will it work? Rebecca asked directly. We're cautiously optimistic, Stone replied. The initial response looks promising, but we're still facing a serious situation. She exchanged a glance with the other doctor before continuing. Rebecca, I need to prepare you for what you'll see when we change your bandages. The debridement was extensive. There will be significant changes to the appearance of your hands. The clinical detachment in Stone's voice sent a chill through Rebecca. How extensive, she pressed. Stone sighed. We had to remove large portions of compromised tissue, particularly on your right hand where the infection began. In some areas, we needed to cut quite deep down to tendon and bone in certain spots. Rebecca felt a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with her fever. Function, she managed to ask. Will I be able to use them? It's too early to say definitively, Stone answered honestly. That will depend on how well the treatments work, how the tissues heal, and how successful any reconstructive surgeries might be. Reconstructive surgeries. The phrase hung in the air like a death knell. Rebecca turned her face away, unable to bear the weight of the doctor's gaze. She thought of all the things her hands had done, taken notes during lectures, adjusted microscopes, handled delicate marine specimens, intertwined with David's fingers on long walks along the shore. Would they ever do any of those things again? I understand this is overwhelming, Stone continued, her voice softening slightly. But I want you to know that we're pursuing every possible avenue. Your mother's research has given us insights we wouldn't otherwise have had. Can I see them? Rebecca asked suddenly. My hands, I want to see what I'm dealing with. A tense silence fell over the room. Marjo made a small sound of distress. Stone's expression remained neutral, but her hesitation spoke volumes. "I don't think that's advisable right now," she said finally. "The psychological impact could complicate your recovery. Once we're certain the infection is under control." "They're my hands," Rebecca interrupted, a sudden fierce determination cutting through her fear. "I need to see what's happening to them, please." Stone studied her face for a long moment, then nodded reluctantly. "Very well, but I want to be clear. What you'll see is mid-treatment. The appearance now is not necessarily indicative of the final outcome." With careful movements, Marjo and Stone began unwrapping the bandages on Rebecca's right arm first. The sterile gauze peeled away layer by layer, revealing first her forearm crisscrossed with angry red lines, but still recognizably her own. Then her wrist, mottled with bruising from IV sites. And finally, her hand. Rebecca's breath caught in her throat. The hand before her barely resembled a hand at all. Large sections of skin and underlying tissue had been removed, creating crater-like depressions that exposed glimpses of yellowish tendons, and in some places, the white gleam of bone. What skin remained was a patchwork of discolored areas, blackened necrosis surrounded by vivid red inflammation. The fingers were swollen to nearly twice their normal size, the nails blue-black at their bases. "Oh my God," she whispered, unable to tear her gaze away from the ravaged appendage that had once been her right hand. "The appearance is alarming, I know," Stone said quickly. "But much of what you're seeing is necessary surgical intervention to stay ahead of the infection. The blackened areas are necrotic tissue we'll remove in subsequent procedures." But Rebecca barely heard her. All she could think was, this isn't a hand anymore. This is a nightmare made flesh. This is what killed my mother. "Enough," Marjo said firmly, beginning to rewrap the bandages. "That's quite enough for now." As the horrific sight was covered once more, Rebecca felt something inside her break free. A sob that rose from somewhere deeper than her physical pain, deeper even than her fear. It was the sound of surrender, of realizing that nothing would ever be the same again. "Why did this happen?" she asked through her tears, her voice cracking. "Why us? Why this bacteria?" Stone's professional composure faltered slightly, revealing a glimpse of the human being beneath the doctor's mask. "Science can tell us how, Rebecca, but rarely why. Your mother was studying something dangerous, and that danger found its way to you through a series of unlikely connections. It's not fair, it's not just, it simply is." As Rebecca closed her eyes, the image of her ravaged hand remained burned into her mind. A vision of horror that she knew would haunt her dreams for years to come, if she survived to have them. "Rest now," Marjo murmured, adjusting the pain medication. "Sometimes the only way past the nightmare is through it." The waiting room of Portland General Hospital's intensive care unit had become Jessica Miller's second home over the past 72 hours. She'd claimed a corner near the window, her laptop open on the small table beside a collection of empty coffee cups and half-eaten sandwiches from the cafeteria. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind a crisp autumn day with sunlight glinting off the Columbia River visible in the distance. Jessica rubbed her eyes, blurry from lack of sleep, and too many hours staring at medical research papers. Since discovering Anna Holmes' notebooks, she'd been obsessively searching for any additional information that might help Rebecca. combing through scientific journals, marine biology publications, and environmental reports from the past decade. "You look like you could use this," came a gravelly voice. Marjo Renner stood before her, holding out a steaming cup of coffee. "It's the good stuff from the doctor's lounge, not that swill from the cafeteria." "Thanks," Jessica said gratefully, accepting the cup. "Any news?" Marjo settled into the chair opposite her, movements betraying the bone-deep fatigue of someone who had been on their feet far too long. "That's what I came to tell you. Dr. Stone just finished the latest round of cultures." She paused, a smile breaking across her weathered face. "The infection has stopped spreading." Jessica nearly spilled her coffee. "Seriously, the treatment is working." "Appears so," Marjo confirmed. "The silver-based compound, combined with the aggressive debridement and specialized antibiotics, it's turning the tide. The lab is showing significant reduction in bacterial load." "Oh, thank God," Jessica breathed, feeling tears prick her eyes. "So she's going to be okay." Marjo's expression tempered. "She's not out of the woods yet, as my granddaddy would say. The systemic infection is responding to treatment, but the damage to her hands," she trailed off, searching for the right words. "It's extensive, honey. There's no sugarcoating that." Jessica set down her coffee, the momentary elation giving way to a more complicated reality. "How extensive?" Dr. Stone had to remove large portions of tissue, especially on the right hand where the infection began. "We're talking significant reconstruction will be needed, and even then, full function isn't guaranteed." The words landed like stones, heavy with implication. Jessica thought of Rebecca's hands always in motion, sketching observations, manipulating lab equipment, gesturing animatedly when discussing her research. Hands that defined not just what Rebecca did, but in many ways who she was. "Has she seen them?" Jessica asked quietly. Marjo nodded, her expression grim. "Insisted on it against Dr. Stone's advice. It was difficult, the kind of moment that changes a person." "Can I see her?" "She's sleeping now. The procedure was exhausting, and her body needs rest to continue fighting," Marjo replied. "Later this afternoon, perhaps. Dr. Stone wants to discuss something with you first, though." "With me? Why?" "Something about Rebecca's blood work," Marjo said. "She said it might be important." Before Jessica could press for details, the waiting room door opened, admitting Stone. The infectious disease specialist looked as though she hadn't slept in days, her silver-streaked hair escaping its usual neat bun, dark circles prominent beneath her eyes. Yet there was an energy in her movements, a purposefulness that hadn't been there before. "Miss Miller," she acknowledged, taking the seat Marjo vacated. "I assume Nurse Renner has updated you on Rebecca's condition." "She said the infection has stopped spreading," Jessica confirmed. "That's good news, right?" "Very good news," Stone agreed. "The treatment protocol derived from Anna Holmes' research is proving effective. The bacterial load is decreasing, and Rebecca's fever has reduced significantly." Marjo mentioned you wanted to discuss her blood work. Stone nodded, her expression thoughtful. "We found something unusual in Rebecca's immunological response, something that may explain why she's responding to treatment when her mother didn't." She pulled a tablet from her coat pocket, bringing up a series of complex medical charts. Despite sharing a genetic predisposition that made them both vulnerable to this particular pathogen, Rebecca's immune system is mounting a more effective secondary response, than her mother's did. Secondary response, Jessica echoed, struggling to follow the medical terminology. When our bodies encounter a pathogen, they create antibodies to fight it, Stone explained. If we encounter that same pathogen again, the response is typically faster and stronger. That's why vaccines work. What's puzzling is that Rebecca is showing signs of this enhanced secondary response, despite no documented prior exposure to this bacteria. Jessica frowned, trying to process this information. Could she have been exposed without knowing it? Maybe through David's aquarium before. Possibly, Stone conceded, but there's another explanation that fits the data better. She hesitated, then continued carefully. Anna Holmes was pregnant with Rebecca while conducting her initial research on coastal water samples. If she experienced a mild, unrecognized exposure during that time, Rebecca could have developed antibodies before she was even born. Jessica finished the implication dawning on her. So her mother's work might have actually protected her, in a way. It's a working theory, Stone acknowledged. We'd need more extensive testing to confirm it, but if correct, it suggests that Anna's research didn't just provide the treatment protocol. Her very exposure may have given Rebecca the immunological edge that's helping her survive. The connection across time and biology struck Jessica as both beautiful and terrible. Anna unknowingly passing to her daughter not just the genetic vulnerability to this pathogen, but also the beginnings of a defense against it. Does Rebecca know about this theory? Jessica asked. Stone shook her head. Not yet. I wanted to verify our findings first, but I think it might bring her some comfort, knowing that her mother's work, and perhaps even her illness, created a protection that's now saving Rebecca's life. Jessica nodded slowly, tears threatening again. A final gift from mother to daughter. Indeed, Stone agreed softly. Science rarely concerns itself with poetry, but occasionally it creates some anyway. When Rebecca next opened her eyes, the hospital room was bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. For a moment, she simply watched dust motes dancing in the sunbeams, her mind wonderfully, mercifully empty. Then awareness returned of where she was, of what had happened, of the bandaged remnants of her hands resting on pillows beside her. There she is, came a familiar voice. Rebecca turned her head to find Jessica sitting beside the bed. Dark circles under her eyes, but a genuine smile on her face. Hey, Rebecca managed, her voice hoarse. You look terrible. Jessica laughed, the sound brightening the sterile room. That's rich, coming from someone who's been at death's door. But thanks, I needed to hear that. How long have you been here? Pretty much since they admitted you, Jessica replied. Had to make sure these doctors were doing their job right. Rebecca attempted a smile, though it felt foreign on her face. Any news? No one will tell me anything concrete. Jessica leaned forward, her expression turning serious but hopeful. The treatment is working, Becca. The infection has stopped spreading. Dr. Stone says your blood work is showing significant improvement. A cautious relief bloomed in Rebecca's chest. Really, they're sure. As sure as doctors ever are, Jessica confirmed. Stone said they're cautiously optimistic, which I think is doctor speak for things are looking good, but we don't want to jinx it. Rebecca's gaze drifted to her bandaged hands. And these, what's the prognosis? Jessica's hesitation told Rebecca everything she needed to know. They're focusing on saving the tissue that remains, Jessica said carefully. Once the infection is fully under control, they'll start talking about reconstructive options. I saw them, Jess, Rebecca whispered. When they changed the bandages, they hardly look like hands anymore. Jessica reached out, gently touching Rebecca's arm above the bandages. I know, but medicine can do amazing things these days. And even if they can't restore everything, she paused, searching for the right words. You're more than your hands, Becca. You always have been. The simple truth of this statement struck Rebecca with unexpected force. For so long, she defined herself by what she could do, her research, her studies, her ability to work independently. The prospect of losing that self-definition was terrifying. Yet Jessica's words suggested another possibility. That perhaps her identity wasn't as tethered to physical capability as she'd always assumed. Dr. Stone has a theory about why you're responding to the treatment when your mother didn't. Jessica continued, clearly trying to steer the conversation toward more hopeful territory. She thinks you might have developed antibodies before you were even born, because your mother was exposed while she was pregnant with you. Really? Rebecca asked, genuinely intrigued despite her exhaustion. Yes, your mother's work, the very thing that eventually made her sick, might be what's saving you now, Jessica smiled sadly. Like she found a way to protect you even after she was gone. The poetic symmetry wasn't lost on Rebecca. Her mother's scientific legacy, preserved in meticulous notes and research papers, reaching across years to offer protection when Rebecca needed it most. There's something else, Jessica said, hesitation evident in her voice. Something Dr. Stone discovered in your mother's personal notes, separate from her official research. What is it? She knew Becca. Toward the end, when she was very sick, she suspected the connection between her research and her illness. Her last journal entry mentions concerns about specimens she'd collected from Tillamook Bay, the same location where David later gathered fish for your aquarium. Rebecca closed her eyes, the pieces falling into place with devastating clarity. A circle, she murmured. We've been moving in a circle this whole time. What do you mean? My mother studies a bacteria, becomes infected, and dies. David unknowingly collects the same bacteria, keeps it in our aquarium, then dies in an accident. I keep the tank as a memorial to him, allowing the bacteria to grow stronger. Then I finally decide to clean it, becoming infected with the same thing that killed my mother. Rebecca laughed bitterly. It's almost elegant in its cruelty. But the circle breaks with you, Jessica insisted. You're going to survive this, Becca. Your mother's research made sure of that. As the golden afternoon light began to fade, Rebecca found herself contemplating this unexpected gift. A mother's protection reaching through time, science creating a bridge between loss and survival. Perhaps the circle wasn't closing around her after all. Perhaps it was finally breaking open. 8 months later, Rebecca Holmes stood at the edge of Tillamook Bay, watching the spring tide roll in. The late May sunshine cast golden ripples across the water, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of salt and new growth. At her feet rested a small wooden box, hand-carved and sealed with beeswax, a container for memories and final goodbyes. She lifted her hands, examining them in the clear light. The rite was more mechanical than organic now. A complex arrangement of skin grafts, reconstructed tendons, and custom prosthetic components where bone and tissue had been too damaged to save. 3 fingers moved with reasonable dexterity, The others remained largely immobile despite months of intensive therapy. Her left hand had fared better, retaining most of its function, though bearing the roadmap of scars that told the story of her brush with death. "Need any help with that?" Jessica asked, approaching from where she'd parked the car. She gestured toward the wooden box but didn't move to take it, understanding Rebecca's need to do this herself. "I've got it," Rebecca replied, her voice stronger than it had been in months. "Just waiting for the right moment." Jessica nodded, standing beside her friend in companionable silence. The past 8 months had transformed them both, Rebecca through her struggle for recovery, Jessica through her unwavering presence during that journey. Their friendship had deepened into something that transcended ordinary bonds, forged in the crucible of near tragedy and daily triumphs. Rebecca glanced at her watch, a special design with a magnetic clasp she could manage with her limited dexterity. Almost time. The tide was coming in, water creeping higher along the rocky shore. This was the spot where Anna Holmes had collected her samples years ago, where David had later gathered specimens for their aquarium. The circle of connection, of loss and discovery, centered on this unremarkable stretch of Oregon coastline. "You sure you want to do this?" Jessica asked softly. "No one would blame you if you changed your mind." Rebecca smiled, the expression coming more naturally now than it had in the early days of her recovery. "I'm sure. It feels right." When the tide reached its peak, Rebecca carefully knelt at the water's edge. With deliberate movements, the product of countless hours of occupational therapy, she opened the wooden box to reveal its contents. A small portion of David's ashes, preserved after his funeral 3 years earlier, a weathered notebook that had belonged to her mother, and several photographs showing 3 generations of Holmes women at this very bay. "I held on to these things because I was afraid of forgetting," Rebecca said, not to Jessica, but to the sea itself. "I thought memories lived in objects, that letting go meant losing the people I loved all over again." She traced a finger along her mother's notebook, feeling the indentations where Anna's pen had pressed against paper, recording observations that would ultimately save her daughter's life. "But memories don't live in things," Rebecca continued. "They live in us, in what we learn, what we pass on, how we change." With careful movements, she removed the contents of the box one by one. First, she opened the notebook to its final pages, Anna's last research notes, written as she began to suspect the connection between her work and her illness. Rebecca tore these pages free, folded them into a paper boat as her mother had taught her to do as a child, and set it gently on the incoming tide. "Your work is done, Mom," she whispered as the small vessel bobbed on the waves. "You saved me. Now you can rest." Next came the photographs, which Rebecca tucked back into the box. These she would keep memories that brought joy rather than anchored her to grief. Finally, she lifted the small container of David's ashes, feeling the familiar weight in her reconstructed hand. "I kept your aquarium because I couldn't bear to say goodbye," she said softly. "I thought keeping it meant keeping part of you alive. But all I did was create a home for the very thing that nearly destroyed me." With a deep breath, Rebecca opened the container and scattered the ashes across the water's surface, watching as they dispersed among the waves. "Goodbye, David," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "Thank you for the love we shared, for the passion you brought to everything, for teaching me that life is meant to be lived fully, even when it hurts." As the last of the ashes disappeared into the tide, Rebecca felt a weight lift from her shoulders, not the sudden release of a burden dropped, but the gentle lightening that comes with acceptance. The circle was complete, the connections honored, the lessons learned. "Well, I'll be," came a familiar voice from behind them. "If it isn't my favorite patient out conquering the world already." Rebecca turned to find Marjo Renner making her way carefully down the rocky path, dressed not in hospital scrubs, but in casual clothes, her gray hair loose around her shoulders. "Marjo," Rebecca exclaimed in surprise, "what are you doing here?" "Your friend invited me," Marjo replied, nodding toward Jessica. "Said you were doing something important today and thought you might like some extra support." She approached, eyeing Rebecca's hands with a professional assessment. "How's the therapy coming along?" "Better every day," Rebecca replied, demonstrating by carefully closing and opening her right hand. The movements were stiff but purposeful. "Dr. Martinez says I've exceeded expectations." "Of course you have," Marjo said with a satisfied nod. "Knew you were a fighter from day one." She glanced at the wooden box, then at the water where David's ashes had disappeared. "Saying your goodbyes." "More like making peace," Rebecca clarified. "With the past, with what happened, with who I am now." Marjo softened with understanding. "Every storm runs out of rain, sweetheart. The sun always comes back." The three women stood together at the edge of the bay, watching as the tide reached its peak and began, imperceptibly at first, to recede. Life moving in its endless cycles of advance and retreat, of fullness and emptiness. "So," Jessica said eventually, breaking the contemplative silence, "should we tell her the news?" Rebecca smiled, anticipation brightening her expression. "Might as well. She'll find out soon enough." Marjo looked between them, eyebrows raised. "What news?" "I've been accepted back into the graduate program at the Marine Biology Institute," Rebecca announced. "Starting this fall, with some accommodations for my hands." "Of course you have," Marjo exclaimed. "Though I can't say I'm surprised. You've got more determination than most folks I've met in all my years of nursing." "There's more," Rebecca continued. "I'll be working on a specific research project, studying the bacteria that infected me and my mother, developing better detection methods for coastal water monitoring." "Turning your trauma into purpose," Marjo nodded approvingly. "Best kind of healing there is." "Dr. Stone is collaborating with us," Jessica added. "She's as invested in this research as we are now." "Well, that's just perfect," Marjo declared. "Your mother started the work, and now you'll finish it. Things have a way of coming full circle when they're meant to." As they made their way back up the path, Rebecca paused for one last look at the bay. The water glistened in the late afternoon sun, beautiful and dangerous and essential, much like life itself. Her hands would never be the same, would never regain their former capability, but they would be enough. They would hold microscopes and test tubes, turn pages in textbooks, type slower but with greater purpose. And perhaps someday, hold the hands of others who needed guidance through their own darkness. "The sea remembers," her mother had said in that fever dream months ago. "It holds onto things we try to forget." But Rebecca was no longer trying to forget. She was remembering purposefully, gratefully, selectively, and moving forward, carrying with her only what served the journey ahead. "Ready?" Jessica asked, waiting at the top of the path. Rebecca nodded, turning away from the harbor with a light heart. "Ready." As we age, we often find ourselves like Rebecca, clinging to remnants of what once was, afraid that letting go means losing those we've loved. We keep their clothes in closets, their voicemails on our phones, their tools in garages untouched. We create shrines to the past, not realizing these memorials sometimes prevent us from healing. Rebecca's journey reminds us that holding on too tightly to what we've lost can unknowingly harm us, while the wisdom to know when to release, like Marjo's gentle observation, that every storm runs out of rain, is the true gift of our years. The most precious legacy our loved ones leave isn't found in objects we can touch, but in how they've shaped our hearts and minds. Anna's research saved her daughter's life long after she was gone, not through the tangible notebook, but through the knowledge she documented and the protective antibodies she unknowingly passed on. As we enter life's autumn, perhaps our greatest challenge isn't preserving the past, but honoring it properly. By taking what serves us, releasing what doesn't, and using our experiences, even the painful ones, to create meaning that extends beyond our own lives. This is how we truly remember. This is how the circle remains unbroken. If only Tommy were healthy, my brother. I'm so ashamed of him. I should have told Jake that I'm an orphan. Again and again, Emma blamed herself, swallowing tears. Because of Tommy's illness, their father left the family 5 years after his birth. Emma understood everything and didn't judge him, because living next to a hopelessly sick child is truly difficult and exhausting. Emma felt like a small and defenseless girl, although she was already 15 years old at that time. The memories swirled around the girl. She closed her eyes and again felt the bitterness, panic fear, and incredible shame. Everything she felt when Jake suggested meeting her mother. When this boy, pressing her tightly to his heart, confessed his tender love for the first time. When he gently looked into her eyes, she was happy and unhappy at the same time. How could Emma bring him home to their small, modest, one-bedroom apartment where her mother and brother lived? Her brother was in a wheelchair and had been sick since birth. He had a severe form of cerebral palsy. Emma's mother, Linda, gave birth to her little brother prematurely. Stress was to blame for everything. While she was pregnant, she constantly argued with the father. The thing was that this pregnancy was unplanned. The woman was already 41 years old at that time, and the father was categorically against having a second child. He sent the woman for an abortion, but she couldn't do it. She couldn't bring herself to kill innocent life. Of course, because of this, the man regularly threw tantrums. As a result, high blood pressure, stroke, and premature difficult labor. The baby had to be pulled out with forceps because Linda kept losing consciousness and couldn't give birth on her own after 15 hours since her water broke. That's why the boy was born very weak, and then came the terrible and disappointing diagnosis. Then their father left the family with the hopelessly sick son. Tommy could barely hold his head up on his own, didn't walk, and almost didn't speak. He just drooled because his mouth with uneven teeth almost never closed, as if he were always smiling. The facial muscles were hopelessly weak and damaged, as was his entire nervous system and spinal cord. The mother worked as a cleaning lady in an office building and lived in a company apartment that they still provided then. That's exactly why she agreed to such a job, to solve the housing issue. And the father moved to a dormitory with a partition in the kitchen and shared facilities. Who thought about Emma then? about her comfort, about how she was living. Let her endure because that's her fate. But she couldn't get used to it. There was always a suffocating, unpleasant smell in the room because her brother soiled himself and was in diapers. It seemed to Emma that her clothes, underwear, and she herself were all soaked with the stale smell of their home. She was ashamed to go to school, ashamed to approach her classmates once again. She cried bitterly at night. At 16 years old, on weekends, she went to the public bathhouse, where she mercilessly scrubbed her body with a washcloth. That's when the girl developed many complexes and fears. The shame burned so much that she was afraid to even talk to anyone. Once Emma was returning from the supermarket, and her bag tore. Several oranges immediately spilled out through the hole, and a container of sour cream fell out. A guy ran up, offered help, gave her his bag. That's how they met. Her young heart wanted tenderness and at least a drop of love, and Jake seemed to sense all the depth of Emma's loneliness and offered his strong shoulder. They started dating. Emma turned 18. She thought more and more often about moving out, but couldn't bring herself to start a conversation with her mother. She had stopped communicating with her father almost immediately after he left. But she pitied her mother, helped her of course, but there were no warm relations between them. It was as if resentment lurked there for the absence of a normal childhood, so-called personality formation, and later normal youth. When she wanted to be alone, oppressive tears involuntarily came to her eyes when Emma thought about all this. Her mother could have abandoned the little one, as they suggested to her in the maternity ward, for example. Emma probably would have done just that. Mom could have devoted her life to her healthy child, that is, to her daughter. But she chose differently. It seemed to Emma that the girl was needed by no one. Jake managed to give Emma love and everything she so lacked. She also gave everything without hesitation. He was her first man. Emma and Jake had been dating for 4 months, and everything was heading toward marriage. Her chosen one was, unlike Emma, from a wealthy family. "He's not right for you," her inner voice stubbornly whispered. But love overshadowed both reason and any other feelings except burning, bitter shame. Emma categorically refused to introduce him to her mother, finding countless reasons for 2 whole months. Well, how would she do it? She was the daughter of a local cleaning lady. Over time, her mother had turned into an aunt of indeterminate age. Although her mother was only 48, she looked much older. Emma realized that because of this panic fear and shame before Jake, because of this secret about her shameful origin, there could be no future with her beloved. After all, Jake had very well-off parents, influential people in high positions. And here next to him was Emma, touched from a poor family, with a disabled brother and a poor mother, Linda, who, moreover, worked as a cleaning lady. A woman with deep, bitter wrinkles, wrapped in an old woolen scarf, hunched over from daily worries and a hard life. Do you know who her mother is, this Emma of yours? Have you completely lost your mind? Jake's mother inquired. She was a very well-groomed lady with a beautiful hairstyle and exquisite manicure. No, her son had just come out of the bathroom, drying his hair with a towel, and still not suspecting anything. "She hasn't introduced us yet," he said. "Next week she'll invite us over." "Well, she works as a janitor and they live in a company apartment. And also your Emma has a disabled brother. That's bad heredity. Do you want defective children? A girl without family, without tribe, found in a dumpster. If she were some beauty, I would understand. There would be attractive appearance, beautiful hair, shining eyes. But there's none of that. Just an ordinary gray mouse. Jake stopped for a moment and frowned his handsome, high forehead. It became clear to him why Emma had been stalling for so long, and he had already bought an engagement ring. He wanted to ask for the hand of his beloved girl's mother, but he knew nothing and didn't suspect anything. His father's high position in the Department of Education allowed his mother not to work anywhere. Their family had always communicated only with, so to speak, the city's elite, wealthy businessmen and their beautiful wives, with all kinds of high-ranking workers in expensive, exquisite suits, with bigwigs who came to any event in cool cars and were mostly driven by chauffeurs. And suddenly, such a surprise with the future bride. He would have liked to smile, to say something in Emma's defense, but instead he gloomily remained silent and thought. To bring such a girl into the family, even if she would be a good wife, modest, faithful. Everything happened suddenly. Jake left Emma. He simply wrote a short message. "Sorry, we shouldn't meet anymore. I'm marrying another girl from my circle. Our mothers are friends, so forgive me. You'll find your happiness too. Goodbye." When Emma, having cried all her tears, got up from bed, she immediately started looking for a room, anywhere, just separate and cheaper. She moved away from her mother without explanations to a student dormitory on the outskirts of the city. She settled in a very poor, small room with 2 beds. The dorm supervisor, an ordinary rude woman with a bun, demanded payment in advance for 2 months and informed her that she would later move in another girl student. But for now, let Emma live alone. She showed her the shared toilet and kitchen with black mold on the ceiling near the window. The kitchen was shared by 4 rooms. There were gas stoves in a row. The kitchen was locked with a key, which the woman handed to Emma with the words, "The stove for your room is the second from the window. Everything clear? Yes." Emma couldn't wait to close the room door and be alone. Again, she was enveloped by bitterness and despair. Hopelessly ruined dreams. The girl felt the beginning of hopeless depression. She lay down on the bed, turned toward the wall, and stared at the plaster peeling off in places. Her dry eyes burned from previously shed painful tears. Emma had to get up from bed after some time anyway and go to the toilet. It was deep night. The girl left the room into the empty corridor. Night silence, darkness. Emma took her phone and turned on the flashlight, which illuminated the walls painted halfway in a peeling gray color. She even wanted to return and look for some bucket in the room. It was so scary to go to the end of the corridor. But still, she gathered herself, sighed heavily, stepped over the threshold of her room, and closed the door. Opening the toilet, Emma wrinkled her forehead and covered her nose with her hand. A sharp smell of cigarette fumes and stale air hit her nose. "Does anyone even clean here?" flashed through her thoughts. The cleaning schedule hung on the toilet door. There were 4 stalls for 4 rooms. Her room number was listed for tomorrow. Damn, I just moved in and already have to clean the toilet tomorrow. On the way out, she stopped for a moment and began studying the list. Suddenly, she saw a woman coming toward her. A t-shirt stretched over her chest, sweatpants stretched at the knees, short disheveled hair, a real dorm dweller who had a somewhat shabby, unkempt appearance. Emma sighed with relief, wanted to greet her, to get acquainted, when suddenly the light of the phone's flashlight caught the face of this nighttime encounter. Her hand trembled and the phone fell to the floor. The stranger's face was as if mummified, like a yellow mask. terrible, distorted as if charred, torn skin. Red, wide-open, motionless eyes, and in them terrible emptiness. Incredible fear paralyzed all of Emma's movements. Without even picking up the phone, she ran in panic toward her room. And then the monster grabbed Emma by the arm and squeezed her so tightly that the girl cried out. But her frantic scream stuck in her throat. With her other hand, Emma tried to loosen the monster's fingers in female form. She bit with all her strength, tore the sleeve of her sweater, and finally slipped away. She ran. Behind her she could hear wheezing and hissing. Here were the cherished doors. She opened them, ran inside, but the terrible, distorted yellow hand didn't let her close the door completely. It pushed through the small gap that still remained. Emma pressed with all her might. She heard neither the crunch of bones nor other sounds. Only the pitiful creaking of the door, her heavy breathing, and rapid heartbeat. Emma's teeth again clung to the fingers that wouldn't let her close the door. A sticky clot, similar to blood, remained in place of the bony fingers. Finally, Emma managed to close the door. She pressed against it with her whole body, closed the latch that began to bend under the weight of the blows on the other side. The door shook until Emma pushed a heavy dresser against it. And where did she get the strength? But suddenly, the clot left on the door frame began to move, and from it crawled some absurd large black creatures similar to cockroaches. They quickly filled the small room, began crawling on Emma's legs, and then on her arms. A scream broke from the girl's lips, and she began frantically stomping her feet, shaking these disgusting bugs off her body. Behind the door came a creaky, eerie laugh and a low voice. "Don't struggle, little one. You're in a trap. You can't destroy them all." "What are you, you filthy, disgusting evil spirit?" "This is a nightmare, a dream. This isn't real," Emma screamed back. "I am their ruler of cockroaches, mice, and rats that live in the basement. Do you want to become one too? Rejoice, I chose you for the role of my assistant. You don't need to scream. Don't strain yourself, little one. I put everyone to sleep. I am the mistress of this dwelling. They call me the keeper. Open up." The voice behind the door was creaky, but confident and convincing. The keeper, or the mistress of epidemic fear and rage, is a typical dormitory house spirit. She called herself that. This creature feeds on students' fears and their negative emotions. She is not a good house spirit that lives in a cozy home or apartment, and mostly only comes out at night. In a monster of such a large building as a dormitory, there are countless duties, and no one pours milk into a saucer for her. No one talks to her. They only curse her when the lights go out or the old refrigerator breaks. That's why she's looking for an assistant. She's been looking for a long time, but modern residents aren't afraid of her at all. Moreover, they even greet her and ask how things are going without looking at her, just staring into their damn phones. Emma didn't know any of this and desperately fought with the cockroaches, but there were no fewer of them. Then the girl jumped onto the windowsill and threw open the window. A sharp gulp of cold air didn't bring the girl to her senses. Panic fear almost paralyzed her. She regretted the phone that remained on the corridor floor near the toilet. With incredible disgust, she crushed another dozen cockroaches and filled her lungs with cold air. So she had only one way out, to jump from the window. First, the girl leaned out, moving to the edge of her windowsill closer to the makeshift canopy that protruded above the second-floor window. She fell onto this sloping awning, which fortunately softened the blow. and only then rolled onto the cold, wet asphalt. Despite the sharp, piercing pain, Emma got up and continued moving, limping on her left leg. She ran toward the city center, toward those familiar places where her mother lived. Here's the highway, here's the road to the city, and here's the eerie, dry female figure in loose clothing that silently separated like a shadow from the doors of the gray dormitory building. Emma laughed and accelerated. She knew for sure that this woman monster wouldn't go far from her dwelling. How will the residents manage without you? Go back, you keeper, you abomination. You're wrong, little one. I'll get you. And the house spirit also quickened her step. Bleeding from her broken head, watching her unnaturally bent, obviously broken left leg that was dragging, and not feeling pain, only sticky horror, Emma jumped onto the roadway. A car racing down the road barely managed to brake, and the girl barely managed to jump back onto the shoulder. A man quickly jumped out of the car. Fortunately, he didn't ask stupid questions about what happened. He simply helped the girl sit in the seat next to him. My God, what happened to you? You need a doctor. Who did this to you? No one. I jumped myself from a window on the 3rd floor of the building. There. Just take me home, please, faster. The keeper was running behind them, and Emma was already losing consciousness. But holding on with her last strength, she begged and pleaded with the driver. That thing approaching is not human. Drive, please, I beg you. Fortunately, the driver listened and drove off, picking up speed. Emma came to her senses in the hospital. Her arm and leg were in casts. Her eyes barely opened from swelling and bruising. Her crying mother sat beside her. So much unspeakable pain and despair the girl read on the face of her dear person. And so much relief when Emma barely opened her eyelids. Daughter, forgive me. I understand everything. That boy left because of me, and you moved out because of me. If it weren't for me, none of this would have happened. Mom, you forgive me, Emma whispered with parched, disobedient lips, again falling either into sleep or into gray fog. Later she came to her senses again. A needle from an IV was inserted into her healthy, unbandaged hand. Medicine slowly dripped, and Mom was nearby again, tired smile, bruises under her eyes. Mom, my phone. Yesterday, while you were sleeping, I found the dormitory. I haven't taken your things yet. They're unpacked in the suitcase, and the phone, here it is. Where was it? In the room on the table. When you entered, the supervisor opened the door. They were propped up by a dresser. They barely managed it together, her and such a heavy, strong man, a plumber. They hooked the latch with a long, thin needle, and then both leaned on the door with all their weight. That's how they gave way. Don't worry. Everything will be fine. Rest, dear. I have to go home. How did my phone end up on the table in the room? I didn't pick it up. I didn't have time. I didn't have it with me. Coming to her senses, Emma suddenly realized. She looked around in horror. Mom was no longer beside her. The phone lay with a dark screen turned off, probably discharged. She wanted to look, stretched out her healthy hand, but it was cotton-like, disobedient. And when the hand turned palm down, Emma suddenly saw among the thin hair on her arm a large, long red hair similar to a cockroach's whisker. And while her eyes, speechless with horror, looked at this hideous phenomenon, the whisker or thin red leg moved, and another one crawled out from under the skin. Emma tightly closed her eyes, from which heavy tears rolled. No, I just imagined it. This is a terrible dream, just a dream. Now I'll open my eyes. but she was afraid to open them. Her heart skipped a beat. Sticky horror paralyzed even her thoughts. "A dream," her subconscious cried. "A dream," her lips quietly repeated. "What daughter?" Emma's eyelids immediately opened. She looked at her arm, which her mother was gently squeezing. "Nothing. Mom, I just had a nightmare." "You'll come home, yes, daughter. This wasn't a suicide attempt, right?" "No, no, no, not at all. I wasn't trying to end my life. I'll tell you everything later." "What happiness, dear. Everything will be good for us now." "Everything will be good now, I know," Emma said tiredly, and then turned her hand over and made sure that it probably just seemed that way, since she was still under the influence of medication. Emma convinced herself that she would overcome the house spirit. The main thing was not to be afraid and not to imagine all sorts of nonsense. After all, she knew her enemy, and she would never return to the dormitory. Thank you for spending this time with Brad Arrows. We hope the stories whispered through the rain carried you far into your imagination or your dreams. If you're still awake, let us know how you liked the journey. Until next time, stay safe, sleep well, and let the darkness comfort you.